Hello, welcome back. My name is Darren Thomas, and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this particular video, we're going to be learning about a concept called reciprocal teaching and how a teacher or an educator can use this in their classroom. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, when we're talking about reciprocal teaching, this is really part of a philosophy of leading students more towards self-directed learning. So if I had to draw like a little continuum here, you would have totally teacher dependent or teacher led over here. We'll call it TL for short. And we'll have self-directed learning over here. And so reciprocal teaching is a tool to move students away from leaning on the teacher more towards going in a self-directed direction. And so, of course, this is a tool that can be modified and manipulated as you see fit. But the whole ultimate goal here is not really even so much the lesson that is being studied as it is in helping the students to acquire tools to where they become more independent and autonomous in the classroom. That is our goal. So if you look off to the left, you can see that we have 4 steps that need to be implemented in order to make reciprocal teaching happen in the classroom. Number 1 is predicting. Number 2 is questioning. Number 3 is summarizing. And number 4 is clarifying. Each of these steps, of course, are led as much as possible by the student. Of course, as the teacher, you have to use your own judgment and discretion in determining how independently the students can do each of these steps. But let's just learn a little bit more about them in detail. So when we're talking about predicting, we're talking about students making guesses about the text. So before they begin reading, the students examine the text, look at some of the words that are being used, look at some of the headings, look at the pictures, the titles and the subheadings as an example. And they're trying to figure out what is happening without actually reading the text yet. This is trying to jog their knowledge of the situation or to try to grease the wheels, if you will, to use an idiom. And so like I just mentioned, you're trying to get them to access prior knowledge if they have it. So if it's a story about dogs and you're dealing with small children, you might want to, try to get them to share what they already know about dogs, how they act, what they eat, etc. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. Now, after this is done, the next thing is, of course, experiencing the content. And the students begin to read the text, whether individually, in a group, however you as the teacher decide. Now, after they've started reading or at least did some predicting, they can begin to start asking questions. And so what happens is that notice here, every single time is student, student, student. So the students take turns asking the class questions. So one student asks a question, then another student asks a question, etc. And then students begin to answer these questions as well as they can. Now, asking questions is rather challenging because you have to try to discern for yourself what you know, what you do not know, and of course, what you want to know. And this is very challenging even for mature older students in high school, perhaps even in college, to be able to identify what it is they do not know and to be able to identify what they do know. And then, of course, to communicate that in a question. So, for example, let's say a student does know the answer to their question. They still have to articulate that question, which requires some thought. And continuing with that example, if a student does not know the answer to their question, they must realize they don't know, and they also must be able to articulate what they don't know in the form of a question. And anybody who has been in a classroom at any part of their life or career knows how difficult that can be, whether you were a student or as a teacher. And so remember here, if you look at the 4 bullets, students are leading the learning experience. They are making this happening. And in the last bullet here, you can see that the teacher is facilitating. So if a student is struggling to articulate their question, you might, as the teacher, want to jump in to help to clarify or to help them to express what they're trying to say. If students are struggling to answer a question, you might want to, again, try to, scaffold, helping them to come up with the answer. It's really up to you how involved you want to be, but remember that the motivation behind this activity is independence. So stepping back is probably more consistent with the overall original purpose of reciprocal teaching. Step number 3 involves summarizing. And so the teacher will select somebody, again, this is student led, to try to summarize the discussion. What was talked about, the type of questions that were asked, the type of answers that were given. Those are some of the things you do in the summary, in addition to focusing on the text and what was the text about. All right. Now, students will also perhaps comment on or elaborate on the summary. They might want to add something like, hey, you forgot to mention this, or hey, what about this? Whatever happens during the course of this discussion is some of the things you need to be aware of. And again, this is student led, and the teacher is really managing. So making sure people take turns, that they don't talk over each other, that they're respectful to their peers, managing the behavior in case kids are, being difficult in the back of the classroom or not paying attention. And so the teacher is really just on the sideline. All throughout reciprocal teaching, the teacher is on the sideline. And so, I'm assuming you're familiar with what the word reciprocal means. It's like a back and forth between students, and not so much with the teacher. And lastly, we're clarifying. And so anything that was not clear, anything that didn't quite make sense, that's when it's addressed now. This is where the teacher might take a stronger leadership position. Loose ends are dealt with, and you support the students until they have a better understanding of the content. So if students are struggling with something, this is where the teacher kind of starts to assert themselves a little bit more in guiding the learning process and guiding the learning experience. And so again, throughout this entire experience, it's all been student, student, student. And so this is more of a learning experience. It's not really something where you're going to try to build a quiz or a test out of it, because you don't know what the students are going to say. You don't know how they're going to respond to the different questions from their peers. And so this is about developing independence, autonomy, critical thinking skills, and maybe not something necessarily that's going to be on a test. For things that need to be on a test, you might want to try a different approach rather than reciprocal teaching. All right, so to summarize, reciprocal teaching has these 4 steps: predicting, questioning, summarizing, and clarifying. And the idea behind reciprocal teaching is to develop students who are autonomous, independent, and are able to direct their own learning. And the only way to develop these type of skills is to be put in situations in which you must be the leader in how you are digesting and interpreting content. And that is what reciprocal teaching allows you to do with practice. How involved the teacher needs to be is going to depend on a variety of circumstances, things that are beyond the scope of this video: the age of the students, how many kids are in the class, the level of the students intellectually, etc. However, this is yet another tool that you as an educator can use to support your students. So, my name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Thank you very much for watching, and you take care.